would like to tell you a little Robin Williams story because I understand from table to table there were lots of people talking about Robin Williams, and I think all of us are thinking about him. I've told a few of you that Robin Williams was a very good customer of Book Passage, and our own Janelle was really his private bookseller. He came to her for books constantly. And one day I was in the store and Robin was here, and he had ridden his bike to the bookstore as he often did, and he looked pretty sweaty. And he was at the front door and a rather old lady, someone about my age, came up. As she approached the door, Robin, who had such good manners, opened the door for her and said, "Welcome." And she came in and she marched right over to me and she said, "I don't know who's doing your hiring, but you should tell that young man at the door that he needs to dress a lot better to be able to." And I will tell you that Robin loved hearing that. But now I'm going to have the joy of, you've all met Don and you've all met Tony, and I've told you my Don story, but I want to tell you one quick story about Tony. First of all, wherever I go, no matter what, I always have to have a Lonely Planet guidebook. And I realize that Tony and Maureen are doing other things. For example, there's a novel here called The Rosie Project. And I had no idea until after we had picked it for our first edition club, where people get a book by a new author every month, and all of us love this book, that Tony and Maureen had been instrumental in getting that book published. So they are very busy people. But years ago, Tony and Maureen invited Bill and me to come to Australia, and we had the fun of meeting with their conference of travel writers, and I think our job was to tell them what was wrong with the guidebooks, which was hard because we really love the guidebooks. I'm a person that can always find something to complain about, so I went through all of the guidebooks and found things. But it was a great trip, and meeting the people who actually write the guidebooks was thrilling until it was Thanksgiving weekend, and Maureen, who is not American, decided to make a great Thanksgiving dinner for everybody, which was pretty amazing. I mean, I find making Thanksgiving dinner to be hell, frankly. Running a conference, doing all this, and she made us all this beautiful Thanksgiving dinner. It was great until after a few glasses of wine, we had what Tony refers to as the Thanksgiving massacre. Bosnia got into a fight with Turkey. The guidebook writers, I don't know what was going on. I think they were hating each other. I understand the next morning there was a hotel room that you probably had to pay to have refurbished. But I just want to tell you, if in case you think that guidebook writing might not be exciting, so with that, I will turn it over to these two great travel gurus. Who's that walking across the
Since we have sort of started with Robin Williams there, I never met Robin Williams, but I was actually standing at a shop front counter once and heard someone talking next to me and looked aside, and that's exactly who it was, and it was a bicycle shop. So there is proof. This guy was asking about getting his bicycle fixed, and I sort of thought, I recognise that voice, and decided, sure enough, it was.
Where was it?
In San Francisco. Yeah. I was buying a bicycle helmet, and Eric Kettenham was sitting in the car outside, and I came out and he said, who's in there getting his bike fixed? So there you go.
So hello everyone. Hope you had a good dinner. Yeah. Enjoy the piazza. Excellent. I heard the wine wine was good. I didn't have any.
Have some water.
I love it.
So it's wonderful and fortuitous that Tony and I are here for many reasons, but one of the reasons is that Traveler's Tales has just brought out, Jeff Green has reissued Jeff Greenwald's great book, Shopping for Buddhists, which Lonely Planet originally published.
I don't think we did. I think somebody else published it before us.
Harper and Row.
Yeah, that one.
Really?
We won't say this is steadily going downhill, will we? Or ascending. It's gone up and up. You know,
So
Harper
when
and
did Lonely
Row,
Planet
then Lonely
publish it?
Planet, and now Traveler's
When did
Tales.
Lonely Planet publish it?
96.
96.
Yes.
Ah,
Harper and Row in 1989, and then Harper San Francisco 1990.
This book has done the rounds.
So,
It's pouring itself all over the place.
so the latest reincarnation of Shopping for Buddhists has just been brought out by Traveler's Tales with new material. And we just wanted to take a moment because we're all sort of intricately interconnected with the story of Shopping for Buddhists. I knew Jeff back when the book first came out. I probably excerpted it in the San Francisco Examiner and Chronicle where I was travel editor. Lonely Planet picked it up because it's such a great book. So it's got a nice robust history with us. And so we just wanted to take a moment to honor Larry and Jeff and say congratulations on republishing the book.
Do you remember the role?
I don't remember my role. There's a lot I don't remember.
You don't remember the wine?
What was my role?
Your role was the book originally was a monologue, a stage monologue. I'd seen Swimming to Cambodia and thought I could do something like that. So I'd written this monologue for the stage, and I know Don 3 years then, and I told him it was happening at the Intersection for the Arts. So he wrote something out in the travel section, and everyone showed up to see the show. It was sold out, including Robert Hurwitz, the theater critic,
Oh,
for the
yeah.
San Francisco Examiner.
Yeah, yeah.
And his review came out the next week. I've seen Jeff Greenwald, and he's no Spalding Gray.
You're welcome. Pretty awesome, I'd say. Congratulations, gentlemen. And the book is for sale here, I understand.
Could be.
And I'll be happy to sign it.
We'll all sign it.
We'll all sign it. So, I apologize that the faculty are so dour and don't get along well at all. Yeah, so clearly we're all having a good time already. It's a really wonderful gathering. But I'm really especially thrilled to have Tony here. Tony and Maureen have been a part of the conference for many, 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 many years. As all of you, I'm sure, know, Tony and Maureen founded Lonely Planet, the greatest travel guidebook publishing company in the world. Well, it used to be at least.
Until they sold out.
Until they sold it. And they were really just part of the family here. And I remember one of my first trail running conferences, sitting out on the piazza with Tony talking about his latest adventure in some desert somewhere, sleeping under the stars and looking up at the stars and drinking a little bit of water or wine, perhaps. And just how magical it was. And you're a part of the magic of the conference. And so it's really, really wonderful to have you back with us. It's a fabulous honor. And so I thought not everybody knows the Lonely Planet story. You've only told it once or twice, I think. But it would be great if you could recap a little bit. Just
Okay, in 30 seconds.
it's an epic story. In 30 seconds would be great.
We were living in London in '72, and we decided we'd spend a year and get travel out of our system. And so we bought an old car, and this car was so cheap, we thought we'll just drive east, and if it breaks down, we'll just leave it by the roadside and walk away from it. And well, it got us across Europe, and then it got us across Turkey, and then it got across Iran, and we eventually ended up in Afghanistan, where we sold it for a $5 profit. And like I've been saying ever since, it was Bin Laden's getaway vehicle. all this CIA stuff tracking him down. They just need to look for the car. There it was. It was parked outside his place in Pakistan. I think it's still parked outside. The house is gone. The car is still sitting there. Anyway, we carried on, and we eventually ended up in Australia with 27 cents. We hitchhiked into Sydney, and Maureen, when the last car dropped us off, she said, "How much money do we have left?" And I put my hand in my pocket and pulled out 27 cents. And I had a camera. I got $25 for that afternoon. But we thought someone should write a book about this, and that was the first Lonely Planet book. So there you have the Lonely Planet story in 30 seconds.
Of course, what happened after that is one book led to another.
As they tend to.
As they tend to. Led to
And then
another.
Don George came along, and there were a lot more books.
But what was the tipping point where you decided Lonely Planet could actually be a viable publisher?
There were lots of tipping points. I mean, our first book was this little book called Across Asia on the Cheap, which we did for a couple of editions, and then a lot of Asia went wrong. So the Russians invaded Afghanistan, Iran fell over, and the book wasn't viable anymore. But in between, we'd done a second book called Southeast Asia on a Shoestring, which is still around today. It comes out in a new edition every 2 years. It's sold way over 1 million copies now, so that book is still going strong. But there were other little tipping points. The real tipping point, though, was when our India book came out, which was back in 1981, I guess it was.
Wow.
There's somebody I met this evening who used it in 82. There, hands up. 82, India. Yeah, and the India book was suddenly, we had this bigger book that sold more copies and sold at a higher price, and Lonely Planet was instantly a bigger company off the back of one book. But it really was, we weren't like these dot-com businesses that they're founded today and they're worth $1 billion tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Lonely Planet was more like the snowball running downhill. It takes a while to get going, and then it gets going faster and faster. And there are more and more books, and it was great fun. Maureen and I ran the company for getting on towards, certainly a lot more than 30 years, on towards 40 years, and it was fun all the way. We just had a great time. There was the occasional Thanksgiving Day massacre, and authors are strange people.
They are.
And the weirdest thing about them, we always said, is that they're all a little bit eccentric. Travel writers, guidebook writers in particular. Your guidebooks, you go off and you travel around and you're taking notes on everything, and you come back and then you're stuck in front of your computer, and you're not talking to anybody. Your social life has disappeared completely. Your wife has forgotten you, or your husband has forgotten you, whichever way it is. But the weirdest writers were always the women. The women were further out on the edge. God, we had some weird women writers. There was an eccentric population, but the women ones were particularly eccentric. And we always, at the end of every book, you sat down and you thought, well, what's gone wrong, and what's worked out, and what could you improve next time, and what should the author do better. And I always remember there was one author who I'm still good friends with, and actually someone else I met today, I bumped into him recently, and the editors who go through all the pain of getting this book out and everything correct, everything spelled consistently all the way through. The king's name was John at the start, it hasn't changed to William at the end, these sort of things. And they said, well, what could we do next time to improve it? And they said, well, take Scott's hand and write right on one hand and left on the other. Because he's constantly getting left and right mixed up. And then we had to contact him and say, on the map, you say, come out of the train station, turn right, and 1 block you come to the hotel. But in the text, you say, come out of the train station and turn left. Which one do you mean? And it was essentially because he just couldn't remember left and right. Problems with writers.
It's a problem.
It is a problem, yeah. Wonderful text, and it's the right adjective, and everything flows smoothly. It's all really important, but left and right is far more important.
So Southeast Asia on a Shoestring, since you mentioned it, when I was living in Tokyo and getting ready to do my own Grand Asia Odyssey, that was the book. I went to this big bookstore, English language bookstore, Maruzen in Tokyo, and found your little yellow Bible there. And I thought, oh my God, what a revelation. Here's a guidebook that I can actually bring with me, and it'll take me to places and help me get through. And it was an amazing, and you wrote that. That was your book, yeah. And it was amazing.
I always love the way these books sort of have a life beyond themselves. And one of the people like you know, but not necessarily English speaking, and out there. I mean, I'm amazed at the moment all the Chinese who are using Lonely Planet guides. It is just wonderful. I was in China twice last year for Lonely Planet China. Because so many Chinese are traveling now, and there are a lot of young Chinese who are getting out there and exploring things themselves. But one of the Southeast Asia shoestring stories was the Koreans were not allowed to travel overseas except on business or government business until after the Korean Games. The year before the Korean Games, the Korean government for the first time allowed people just to travel independently, but not on business, if they were over 65 years of age. And then after a year they said, well, stuff it, anybody can go. And immediately all these young Koreans who wanted to travel but just couldn't because it was not allowed, hit the road. And one of them was this young Korean couple, and they got out there and didn't have a clue where they were going because there was no background. You didn't know anybody else, and the Chinese go through the same thing right now. You know, your older brother hadn't been there, your friends hadn't been there, you were pioneering. And this young Korean couple got out there, and the first thing they bumped into was Southeast Asia on a shoestring.
Wow. Someone
Someone said you should have this book, and even though English wasn't their first language, they got along with it. And I'm still really good friends with him now. Anytime I go to Seoul, he picked me up in his BMW, and he's got a company in Seoul in Korea called Shoestring Travel. And it's the sort of the student travel center of Korea, and it's named after that book from that trip.
That's
So
wonderful.
there.
Well, so that reminds me of something I said actually last year in Bali, when we were both in Bali talking. So I said this in public already, so obviously I believe it. But what I was saying then and what I still feel now is that Tony and Maureen really, really have changed the world. That they have changed the way that we travel. They've changed the way human beings engage with each other when they're out, when some people are out there traveling and other people are there receiving these travelers. That they kind of set up a model and a template and almost a guideline for how people can travel the world respectfully and knowledgeably and doing the world good rather than bad. And I said then, and I believe it still, that you guys should get the Nobel Prize, Nobel Peace Prize. I really do believe that. You have changed the world. You really have. And, it's going to happen. But I wonder, I mean, you were doing it for fun at the beginning. It was just you wanted to
Fun all the way.
all the way, right? You wanted to fund your travels. You wrote a book, it sold. You said, oh, let's write another book. You wrote another book, it sold. You kept traveling and writing books. It was fun, just fun for a long time. When did it sort of become a business, or when did it become something that was bigger than just you and Maureen funding your travels?
Well, it was a business all along, because if you don't, one of the things we always said is that you can get writers to go out and do a book the first time for nothing. They'll come running up back in the early days. I really want to write a Lonely Planet guidebook. And actually, one of them was one of these crazy women travelers. Turned up at our doorstep in Australia. She was American. She lived in Alaska. And she said, you haven't got a Bolivia guide, I'll write it for you. And we said, oh, sure. And, he said, yes, I will. I've lived in Bolivia for a year. I'll go back to Bolivia and I'll write this book. And we said, okay, write her a contract. So we wrote her a contract, and we said delivery in 365 days' time, 1 year's time. And I think we gave her $100 or something like ridiculous. And 12 months later, someone knocks on the office door and comes in, and she said, I got the Bolivia guide. We said, what Bolivia guide? You gave me a contract a year ago. I mean, they were like that. But you can give someone the first time $100 to do a Bolivia guide, but if they're going to come back next time and do another edition of it, another edition, then it's got to be a business.
Right.
They've got to keep living, and you've got to keep living. So it was a business from the start. We did, look at the bottom line, and it you know, it was great all the way, but there was a sort of 10-year period from about 85 to 95 when it just seemed like we could do nothing wrong. Every book we did just sold like hotcakes, and they all made money, and you know, and we went a bit crazy at times. I think we did a cycling guide to Italy, which I still kick my head about. But Elaine was saying something earlier today about the books in the second-hand part of the hospice place. You know, they said don't be embarrassed if your book is selling for $4 there. When once upon a time it was 40 or something. Well, the Italy book, which we lost, the Italy cycling guide, which we lost money on every single copy we sold until we dropped it. But amazingly, it did start to sell for more than we. And I came to it was such a good book that people still wanted it when it wasn't available. And I remember someone saying once, you know, they're selling on eBay now for $150. And someone else said, hey, if they sold for $150 all the time from the very day one, every single copy, we still wouldn't have made money on it.
When you were writing the first guidebooks that you were doing yourself, were you especially conscious of the values that you were putting into the books, or the way you presented yourself as a traveler, or the kind of advice you were giving people, or was it just...
We weren't conscious of it in the thinking, oh, let's be really good people and say do this and that. We just did it.
You're just good people.
We're just good people. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for saying that. I'll get you $150 afterwards. No, I think we did have looking back, the right attitude about travel.
Yeah.
You know, we enjoyed it, and we wanted other people to enjoy it, and we, you know, appreciated what you had to do if you're going to keep on enjoying it.
Right. One of the things that you paid a lot of attention to is just knowing where you're going, so that you don't violate local customs or taboos, or so you can have a better travel experience. And that was a big part of your message. I felt that people should be knowledgeable and then respectful.
Yeah, and you enjoy it more. You know, when you go to a place and you understand something about it, it opens. And that's one of the things I really loved about writing guidebooks, was it prompted you to learn things and understand things that you wouldn't necessarily have done otherwise. But you go to Ireland and you learn all about beer. And I remember working on our first edition of our Guide to Great Britain, and I suddenly learned all this stuff about church architecture and you know, the different styles of churches, and I could tell one from another and when they were built and so on, and it made them much more interesting things. And I wouldn't have learned this if I hadn't been working on the guidebooks. But it's always interesting if you go to a place and you know more about it. You're a more appreciative traveler, and you're also a better traveler. You fit in more.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for people at the conference, that's what travel writing is all about. Your job requires you to get under the surface of a place, and so you end up admiring it, respecting it, appreciating it more and more. And that's such a bonus. Even if you never end up selling the piece you're researching, you still had an incredible travel experience just because you had to do that in order to write your story. And so you end up with this much deeper, richer, better experience. It's a great bonus of being a travel writer.
Actually, you know, it's a great bonus of being anything, quite frankly. I've always said, you know, if you're in any sort of business, the most important thing is to be doing something you believe in. You know, if you don't believe in it, nobody else is going to believe in it.
Right.
And you know, if it doesn't work, well, at least you have fun getting there.
Absolutely.
Don't do anything you don't believe in.
Right. Were there moments when you felt like giving Lonely Planet up?
Absolutely. they always say, you know, that when you owe the bank $1,000, you are in trouble if you can't pay it, and you know, every small business goes through this. On the other hand, when you get to you owe the bank $1 million and you can't pay it, then the bank's in trouble.
Yes.
And it's really nice when you can reverse that relationship. I worried far more about owing $1,000 than I ever did $1 million. $1 million is the accountants will worry about that. But $1,000, it was out of your own pocket. And I always remember in the early days of Lonely Planet, every week when it came to paying people on Friday, you know, chewing your nails, and
Really?
Thursday night you had sleepless nights. Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah, I think any small business does that.
So when did you stop having the sleepless nights?
When I owed the bank $1 million.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
You think we just paid you and didn't worry?
That's how it worked. Is there a moment that you especially treasure from the Lonely Planet days?
There are lots of them. You know, I was saying earlier about the India Guide. I mean, the India Guide, we had a couple of tough years before the India Guide came out. And it was like that book just instantly turned things around. It came out and we sold it, and then we were reprinting it, and then we were reprinting it again, and it was instantly, you could see it was a book that worked. It was a commercial success, and commercial successes are wonderful. But also instantly we were getting letters back from people about how much they loved using it. So it was a popular success as well. And then it won. There was an annual guidebook award at that time called the Thomas Cook Guidebook of the Year, and we won that. And I had to go to London to get the award and so on. And so it was a commercial success, a popular success, and a critical success. All three things. And I still, for that reason, I still love that book. In India, though, it drives me crazy. I can't help loving India just because of that book.
Was there a signature non-guidebook book? Because you ended up doing a lot of non-guidebook books as well.
Yeah.
You did the rickshaw book.
Yeah, well, and the rickshaw book wasn't a commercial success at all, but
No,
it was
of course not,
it was
but
a
it was a
coffee
good book.
table book that I did with a photographer, and we were just fascinated by the rickshaws of Asia and how they were different style in each country, and the engineering of them was. I'm an engineer originally, in a previous lifetime. So yeah, we did that, and we did lots of interesting things. I mean, we had the travel lit side, which you've been involved in. So there's been all sorts of sides apart from the straightforward guidebooks. The phrase books, which we got into in all sorts of strange fashions, and Lonely Planet publishes more phrase books than anybody else you care to mention, including Berlitz. So it's really rather nice that phrase books are such an interesting part of the whole ball game.
How did it grow? When you started out, there really was no map to follow. There was no guidebook about guidebook publishing that you could read. There were very few even guides out there. Were you just making it up as you went
Yeah,
along?
absolutely. And it was very much, let's go there and do that. Oh, that was fun. Let's there's no sense to it at all. We did the things we wanted to do rather than the things that made commercial sense.
Right.
We'd have got there a lot faster if we'd been sensible. It'd been less fun.
Not nearly as much fun.
Right.
But when you sold Lonely Planet, it had offices worldwide. There's an office in Oakland, there's an office in London, there's the headquarters in Melbourne.
There was even an office in Paris for a long while.
Right.
And our Paris office was our most fun office. God, it did ever lose money. It was the most commercially unsuccessful. It was just a nightmare. But as far as fun to be there, and it's still a great office. I mean, the Lonely Planet France is still going, and it's quite funny because Lonely Planet came along in France later on. Lonely Planet's always going to have this image of shoestring travel and back, even though lots of the books are about lots of fancy hotels are in them, and you can find the finest restaurants anywhere you want to go in Lonely Planet guides. But there's still that sort of backpacker and shoestring travel image. But because it came along a bit later in Paris, it was in France, it was always seen as a little more sort of stylish in French. And it's got a much more sort of, stylish air to it, and I rather like that. And it's funny because it's every country you go to, it's a little bit different. Lonely Planet's incredibly popular in Italy. In fact, we sell more books more Lonely Planet guides. I'm saying we, even though it's not me anymore. Hasn't been for more than 5 years now. But Lonely Planet sells more guides per capita in the Italian language than they do in the States and in English.
Really?
It's so popular in Italy, and partly because there isn't competition. Here you've got Rick Steves, and you've got Froma, and you've got Moon guides and Rough guides and everything else in English.
Right.
But in Italian, Lonely Planet has it all.
Wow.
So I actually, great audience here, but I get just as big an audience in Italy.
Wow.
Even though it has to all be translated because I don't speak Italian.
How many languages are Lonely Planet guides in now?
Oh, quite a few. Some of them just, a few guides, but the big European languages, just about every guide will be in French and German and Spanish and so on. But it's at the moment, it's the Chinese ones that really intrigue me most. And it is this real urge to travel in China. And one of the things that the Chinese partners have done, because Lonely Planet does them all in English, then it's partners who do them in the other languages. And the Chinese partners have, apart from doing the USA guide in Chinese and the Paris guide in Chinese and so on, they also do a series of regional guides to China. And these books were completely done in Chinese, they were never done in English. And when we first did them with the Chinese partners, we sent in English, American, Australian writers who spoke Chinese, who spoke like Mandarin or one of the dialects, and went in with Chinese travel writers to show them how to research guidebooks, because they had no experience of doing this, but they were written by Chinese writers, and they've never been done in English. I mean, there's a guidebook to each region of China, and you pick one up, and it looks like a Lonely Planet guidebook. Unless you can recognize the picture on the front, I can't tell which part of China it is. But I really like that. Those books are working like that.
Well, it's like a second revolution because the Chinese are becoming the great travelers.
Yeah. I wrote a column for a Chinese magazine, a monthly travel column for 3 or 4 years. And I some of it was just sort of, travel, adding a little bit of Chinese flavor to it sometimes. But also I ended up sort of looking at what the Chinese did when they traveled. And one of the little discoveries I made was there was a Chinese poet who ended up at Oxford University, sorry, not Oxford, Cambridge University back in the 20s, and he went off there, came back, broke up with his girlfriend, so there's a sort of romantic side to it, and then in the late 1920s was killed in a plane crash. So it was a bit like a sort of, Buddy Holly or James Dean sort of death. And he's a Chinese poet who every Chinese kid will know some of his poems. They're all taught in all the schools, and one of his poems was about his last days in Cambridge before he went back to China. And all Chinese kids know this, they've learnt it at school. And he writes about sitting under the willow tree at his college in Cambridge, and young Chinese who go to England, they want to go and sit under that willow tree. So I went up to Cambridge and I found the willow tree. And if you look there's a willow tree, there's no Chinese around it. And nobody in English has any idea at all why there's this one particular tree. Which I think that's wonderful. There's a little bit of, there's the most, and I wrote this article and I said, this is the most famous tree in England.
Right.
But nobody in England knows anything about it at all. Isn't that great? It's wonderful.
That's wonderful. There's 2 big evolutions I want to ask you about. The first is publishing. When you look at the evolution of publishing in your lifetime, what do you think? What do you feel?
Well, it's an evolution of still. I mean, one of the things I've got to say, I'm glad I sold Lonely Planet because it's a headache now, John.
Yes, well.
And I didn't realize all these things were going to happen. But it's difficult, and it's the same with anything in media, whether you're in newspapers or television. Or I was at a journalism conference in Italy earlier this year, and the head of Google News was speaking at this conference, and he was saying about how he started his media career in television in the United States. He said, there were, how many radio stations would there have been? ABC, CBS?
4.
Yeah, 4. He said now there's about 40,000.
Yeah.
It's the change is just enormous. And it's the same in anything in media today, whether it's books, newspapers, magazines, television, radio, anything. It's all just in turmoil and change, and we don't know where it's all going and what's going to happen.
How have you personally stayed abreast of that? I mean, I know you write a blog.
Yeah, well, I'm still, I still love travel.
Right.
So I've got a blog that I do, and sometimes I'm really busy on it, and sometimes I don't touch it for a month. So I'm not a good blogger. And I've written a couple of books in the last couple of years, which Lonely Planet have published, and I'm working on another idea at the moment, which I'm still developing. So
Right.
Still doing all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I have lots of other things I'm involved in as well. I'm on the board of an archaeology association, which actually is based in Palo Alto. It's Silicon Valley money that funded it originally. And archaeology is like many things in this world. They need tourists. It's no good having an archaeology site unless you've got people visiting it. Otherwise, you might as well just bury it again. They're going to steal it. So you've got to protect these things. So they only get protected if there's an interest in it. So I'm the sort of I'm the tourism side of the archaeology project. So I get to go to lots of archaeology projects with the archaeologists, which is fantastic. And I go to board meetings. I had a board meeting this morning in Palo Alto.
And then what about the evolution of travel in your lifetime? How do you feel about that?
That's equally fascinating because it's so much. It's like everything else, so much more diverse than it was when we started. And I love the way there are so many different aspects of it. We started shoestring travel, Southeast Asia on a shoestring, and I still really like young people traveling. I think that if you're young and you get out there on the road, that first big trip you do, you'll learn more on it. If you can do a trip that lasts for 6 months or something, you'll learn more on that than you did in your last 10 years of school and the next 3 years of university or whatever. It's a real education. So I love seeing young people travel, and when they come back with the enthusiasm of what they've done and the experiences they've had, I'm really enthusiastic about that. On the other hand, I'm not a young person anymore, and I love some of the travel that I do these days. I'm sometimes quite often at the sharp end of the plane rather than back there in steerage. And that's very nice.
You've earned that, I think. You've earned that.
No, I've just done a trip which was all economy, and
Has your sense of where you want to go changed dramatically through the years?
No, I mean, we should mention the last 2 books I did. I did a book called Badlands, which basically started off that when George W. Bush said, there are 3 countries that are so bad they are an axis of evil, my first thought was, well, I want to go there. I mean, it was like a challenge, wasn't it? Well, so I went straight to North Korea and then to Iraq and then I've been to Iran a few times before, but yeah, they were all great, and I added a few more bad countries. So I made a book, and I've talked about Badlands quite often. And if I'm doing a sort of picture show with it, I start with the cover of the book and George Bush, and I say, George Bush made me write it. And I did this once in China, and it was reported in the Chinese press as George Bush asked me to write it. Not quite the right translation. Close enough. And I followed up Badlands, and I did a book that just came out not quite 12 months ago called Darklands, which was just more dark places. And because they're just really these countries that have gone off the tracks or were never on the tracks. And I love traveling in the civilized places. Send me to Paris anytime at all. I've been in Italy twice this year, and we all love Italy, and every place else, they're all great. But the dark and bad places, there's something about them that I always find kind of fascinating. And so many of them, if they could ever just sort their problems out, Afghanistan would be one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. They didn't have a war going on.
Is there any particular place that you've been, either for those books or independently, but recently, that just stands out in your mind as a spectacular surprise? You weren't expecting it that way?
Well, I wasn't expecting it to be I was expecting it to be just like it was, and it was just like it was. It was the Congo. I went to the Congo for Darklands. And it's a book which just seems to inspire great, I'm not sure, I don't call my writing great writing. I can't claim it inspired me to new literary heights, but the Congo has inspired Poisonwood Bible, Heart of Darkness, Bend in the River, Conrad, and you name a book, and it's equally the same with travel books. Blood River, Radio Congo. I could list this whole series of wonderful books, whether they're novels or travel books, which have all been inspired by travel in the Congo. And I went there and I had a wonderful time. I even got arrested once. It just seems to if you don't get arrested in the Congo, you don't feel like you've had the real experience. What? You didn't get arrested? What was wrong? What do you mean you got a good time there? How do you have a good time if you didn't get arrested?
What did you do?
You're not supposed to take photographs. They just don't like you taking photographs of things. And so I was very sorry. I took my camera, took a photograph, put it away. But there was this wonderful bar in Kisangani, which is the town on the bend in the river. And it was called the Champs-Élysées bar. But, Champs and Élysées were both misspelled in interesting fashions. So I just wanted to photograph the side of the bar, and then somebody came over and sort of and they've always got a card to show who they are, you know,
Yeah.
and arrested me and marched me off to the police station where we talked for an hour or so, and they let me go. So,
That was it?
Yeah, that was it.
Ah.
Didn't pay anything.
No movie there, I don't.
No. But with the movie, it'll all be different.
So, to bring us up to date on you and Maureen now, you sold Lonely Planet about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And you're involved in all kinds of other great projects now. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Well, one of the things is Lonely Planet had a foundation, Lonely Planet Foundation, which really started back in Africa in the time of the famine in the 80s. I'm going to come back to another Africa story in a moment. You know, we were sitting around the office one day and said, look, we're doing books about these countries, we're making money. Lonely Planet still has the only guide to all of Africa.
Yeah.
Nobody else has a guidebook to every country in Africa except Lonely Planet, it always has. So we thought some of the money we make from these things should go back to these countries. So we set up the Lonely Planet Foundation, and we gave a percentage of our profits each year to it, and it became a reasonably substantial. And when we sold the business, we couldn't say, oh, we're selling you the business, and by the way, you bought this not-for-profit as well. You've got to look after it. So it's a fair bit of the money we got from selling Lonely Planet, we put it into the foundation. And only moved out of Lonely Planet office about 6 weeks ago. But we renamed it the Planet Wheeler Foundation, and our daughter helps to run it. As a result, my daughter spends a lot of time in Africa. And it predominantly works in East Africa and Southeast Asia. Those are the two real centers. And it mainly works in health and education. We've got a children's hospital in Cambodia that we've totally funded and built. We've got a school in Tanzania, all sorts of things we do. And about 70 projects at the moment.
Wow.
So it's
Wow. That's awesome. And you bought a publishing company.
We bought this little Australian, well, not all of it, we own 49% of it.
Ah,
A little Australian fiction and non-fiction, and they called Text Publishing, and they do mainly Australian authors, but also, you know, books that they publish in Australia from American publishing houses or British publishing houses. And they've been quite successful all along, they're clever publishing. And then we did this book, Rosie Project, that was just a bestseller everywhere. And about 6 weeks ago, Bill Gates, when he did his annual list of what his summer reading list was, and it's mainly sort of business books and history books and so on, and he said, and one novel, he said, the best novel I've read in years, and it was the Rosie Project. So it's got so the next, there's a follow-up book coming for it, and it's going to have the Bill Gates seal of approval on the book. But I was going to tell you another Africa story, and of all the Lonely Planet stories, my favorite one was a book by an English journalist who was a Reuters correspondent for many years. And he wrote a book called The Zanzibar Chest about his career of Africa and, you know, working in Africa and all the chaos he'd seen and various things. And he was with during the revolution in Ethiopia when Mengistu, the dictator there, was finally kicked out. He now lives in Harare in Zimbabwe because Mugabe looks after him. Anyway, when Mengistu was falling apart and the Russians weren't supporting him anymore, and the rebels had captured these Soviet tanks and equipment, and they were closing in on the capital, and it was obviously the dictatorship was going to fall over. And I wish I remembered the guy's name, the guy who wrote Zanzibar Chess.
Aidan Hartley.
That's it, Aidan Hartley, thank you. He was it's a great book. He was the only journalist at all who was with the rebels. And they captured these Soviet tanks, and the tanks were rolling towards Addis Ababa, the capital. And the morning before they sort of got into Addis Ababa, the rebel commander came over to Aidan and he said, we've got a real problem. He said, you know, most of my men have never been in the capital, Addis Ababa. He said, and those of us who have been, we haven't been there for 10 years or 20 years. And we're really afraid that we're going to, despite all the equipment we've got, we're going to be coming to the town we won't even be able to find our way to the central government building to sort of throw the government out and take over. And Aiden said, you know, what have I got? He said, the only thing I had was my Lonely Planet Africa guide. He said, we got it out, and he said they had a Commandeer photocopier, and they photocopied off the Addis Ababa map, and they distributed it to all the tank drivers. And as the tanks were coming into Addis Ababa, they were saying, you come to the cheap restaurant, and you go down by the Grand Hotel and turn right. And I thought, great, you know, we can recommend restaurants, we can suggest hotels, but then every now and then we can overthrow a government. So that was my proudest Lonely Planet. How I won the war.
Yes. Is there a place that you go back to personally that you just love in your mind, or literally you go back to?
You know, there's lots of places, and you know, Kathmandu, which when Jeff and I first went there, was a very different place than it is today. And you know, it's not the same place it was, but I still get a kick out of going there, and I still sort of find little things in the back streets, and you still get up in the mountains, and the mountains are as high as they've ever been, and it's still, you know, it's still terrific to go there. And there's lots of places which I enjoy. And Burma, Myanmar, which, you know, for a long time was very politically incorrect to go there, and now of course everybody's going there. But yeah, that's an amazing country, and I always get a kick out of it. Which we were talking about it this morning, my archaeology thing at Palo Alto, because they're trying to get involved in some protecting some of these wonderful old colonial buildings in Rangoon. So yeah, but there's also places I've never been to. I mean, one of the countries I have never been to is the Yemen.
Really?
And you know, it's this wonderful mud architecture, these mud skyscrapers, and they say that it's the purest form of Arabic, the Arabic spoken in Yemen. There's a book called Travels in Dictionary Land, which is the classic travel book to Yemen. And for some reason I've never been to the Yemen, so that's on my list.
Wow.
Although I've been talking about being arrested in the Congo, I was at a session like this once, and some of you were talking about this and that, and something came about the Yemen, and someone in the audience, James, what does a woman do when these things happen? She said, oh yeah, I was in the Yemen about 6 months ago, and I was kidnapped, and then held for 6 months. And then so another woman else said, yeah, I was there, and I was kidnapped as well. It's pretty much the same thing, you know, if you went to the Yemen and you weren't kidnapped, you come back and say, you're traveling, I didn't get kidnapped.
You want their money back.
Yeah. I didn't have the real Yemen experience.
What's on your horizon?
Well, I'm actually, the next book I'm working on is my sort of Southwest Airlines book. Well, Southwest is there's every country now has got a Southwest. You know, the Irish have Ryanair, with the famous Michael O'Leary, who's, you know, I've got a book full of just quotes of Michael O'Leary being rude to his. Can't you read the small print? It says no refund. Now piss off. Everyone says the customer is always right. We don't at Ryanair. They're often wrong. Great airline, Ryanair. And then the British have EasyJet, and the Spanish have Vueling, and Turkey has Pegasus, and there's Air Arabia, and there's Fly Dubai, and there's even an airline called Jazeera Airlines from Kuwait.
Wow.
So I thought I'll start off from London, and I'll just jump on the next one, and the next one, and the next one, until I get to Australia. And I've done half of this trip. It took me 16 flights to get to Singapore. It took me 3 weeks to fly to Singapore, and then I got on the plane, and I flew straight back non-stop. Back to London. So that's half the book. And the other half is going to just go on, stop, until I get to Australia. All on cheap airlines.
That's great. And then you're writing about the places where you're...
Places,
the
and
government
the
places.
airlines, and the people who fly on them, and the crazy things that happen. And,
That's great.
and Ryanair, and yeah.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
Is there any project that, besides the book, or any other big projects that you're working on? Is Maureen bringing operas and?
Well, Maureen is, when I want to go somewhere really crazy, Maureen does something equally crazy. She goes to a ring cycle opera.
Right.
She took me to 3. I survived. Those of you who are not Wagner fans, it's sitting through, it's nearly 20 hours of opera spread over 8 days. You've got to be serious about opera to do this. I mean, Maureen loves it. And last year she persuaded Opera Australia to put on a ring cycle in Australia, which was terrific. I mean, that's a lot of critics.
It's the first time, right?
There'd been one once before, but it was the first time in a long time. And they did 3 complete cycles. So. And a lot of people said it was the best ring cycle anywhere in the world in the last couple of years. So it was really great. But Maureen drove that, and she went to 20 hours 3 times, so 60 hours of opera. I went to 20 hours, but that was enough. So anyway, anytime I want to go somewhere crazy like the Congo, Maureen says I'll go somewhere for opera. So as I was flying on 16 airlines to Singapore, she spent 2 weeks going to operas in Europe. We've each got our own travel markets.
Let me see if there are questions in the audience. Does anybody have any questions? Well, way in the back to start. Way back
I'm
there.
so happy. Hi, 1981, India.
1981
That's not
India.
My question is, do you travel as Tony Wheeler or do you travel anonymously when you're out in the world?
Nobody knows who I am. I am anonymous, and it's very, very rare that although funny enough, one of the weird things about getting recognized is it happens so irregularly, and yet sometimes it happens in the weirdest circumstances. And the 2 I remember is both, which was very, once we were doing an article with Smithsonian Magazine, and actually it was about an article written by, it was written by John Krakauer, before John Krakauer became famous. So I can actually say, after we spent 2 weeks in Bhutan with John, we then flew on to Kathmandu, and I was sitting, John had never been to the Himalaya. This is before he wrote his Everest book.
Wow.
And I was sitting next to John, and I was pointing out the mountains as we went by. I said, that one is Everest. So I know the first thing John Krakauer said when he saw Everest for the first time, and it was a 4-letter word that began with the letter F. But anyway, we spent 2 weeks with John, and John really knew nothing about Lonely Planet when he started. And we met him in Bangkok, and then we flew to Bhutan. And the first night we were there, we were sort of telling him about Lonely Planet, and we're walking down the main street of Bhutan, and some Bhutanese guy in his Bhutanese costume says, "You Tony Wheeler?" First of all, John was amazed by this. I was equally amazed. I said, "Well, yes." "How do you know?" And he said, the Bhutanese guy said, "Oh, I go down to India on business quite often." And I said, "I always use the Lonely Planet Guide to India." And I just recognize you from the front of the book. And the other occasion, which was equally crazy, was just when we'd set up our French office. And there was a French TV station was thinking about doing a program about Lonely Planet, and Lonely Planet coming out in French. And I'll tell another French story in a moment. We were talking with these TV people in a cafe in the middle of Paris, and they weren't sort of totally convinced that Lonely Planet was interesting enough. And again, somebody jumps up and says, "Tony Wheeler," en français. So both times, John, so it was almost as if we planted these people. When we launched one of the first books we did in French was the guidebook to Australia, which we translated in French. And the Australian Embassy in Paris, which is right beside the Eiffel Tower, looking out on the Seine, put on a function for it, and we invited all these French journalists and French bookshop owners and so on. So we had a big French crew there, and the Australian ambassador, who spoke fluent French, got up and made this speech about how pleased she was that Australian culture was being introduced to France and blah blah blah. And then I got up, and my French is terrible, but I made a speech, and people laughed at all the right places, so they understood it. And I got up and I apologized for my bad French, and then I said how the French explorer La Perouse had turned up in Australia the week after the British First Fleet had arrived. If they only arrived a week earlier, Australia would have been a French colony. I wouldn't be apologising for my bad French. And afterwards, one of the French journalists came over and she said, "Yeah, it was really interesting this evening." He said, "This sort of function, the Anglo-Saxon person always gets up and they apologise for their bad French and therefore they make their speech in English." He said, "And that's fine." He said, "You know, if you're a journalist in Europe today, you have to speak English and we'd all understand perfectly." He said, "Yeah," I said, "tonight was really different." He said, "You got up, you apologised for your bad French, and then you went on to prove it." That was my whole year. I lived in Paris for a year, and that was my favourite French moment.
It just shows how fearless you are. Other questions? Yeah.
How did you go about naming your business?
Well, we did our very first book, and we were living in Sydney at the time, and we got the book all finished. We had everything except a name for the business, and we'd been thought of this name and that name. We were an Italian restaurant. I can pinpoint where it is. It isn't an Italian restaurant anymore. We had too much red wine. We were thinking up this name and that. Visa Books, that sounds good. This name and that name. Visa credit cards were hardly even existent at the time. And this name and that name. And we'd just been to see a film called Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which is a rock and roll band on the road film. Leon Russell and Joe Cocker. And Joe Cocker sings a song called Space Captain. And there's a line in it which goes, "Once while travelling across the sky, this lonely planet caught my eye." So I said, "That sounds good. Why don't we call it Lonely Planet?" So Maureen said, "Great idea." He said, "Actually, the line is Lovely Planet." I'm sorry, it's been a mistake. It's been wrong all these years.
It's a great name. Yeah.
You talked about how it feels like it's geared towards trekkers, but you still have luxury, things in there. What were the marching orders? So writers, who was your audience? Who did you think was your audience?
Me. I always wrote for me. I did the things that I wanted to know, and as we got older and a little bit better off, the books got a little bit older and better off. But one of the things I always, one of the questions I sometimes, please nobody asked this tonight, is people always say, well, you started off doing books on shoestring travel and staying in places that were never more than $5 a night, or back in those days, $2 a night. Do you still do that? And of course I don't. I've had all the bed bugs I ever need to have. I've gone on beyond that. But there are still some places, if you want to go there, the best hotel in town is going to be $5 a night. And I'm always at the end of the year, I like to look back on the year's diary and think, yeah, there was a $5 a night hotel. So sometimes, you still do those things. And I still really enjoy that sort of travel. I still like the fact. One of the nicest experiences I had with doing Darklands was I went up to New Guinea, and there was an island in New Guinea where they had a long civil war called Bougainville, and the rebels used to come into New Guinea from the Solomon Islands. So I wanted to travel up there the same way the rebels did. So I went up to this island in the north of the Solomon Islands, and I asked around, and I stayed in the church guest house, mission guest house, which was $5 a night. And I asked around the village, and they said, oh, there's someone going over market day, and they'll give you a ride on their boat. So I went over to New Guinea on the boat and landed there. And the only little problem was that it's like, coming ashore on the beach down here, they'd arrest you, wouldn't they? They would, yeah. And, it was totally illegal what I was doing. I wasn't arriving in any place where I could go through immigration and so on. But I'd been speaking to people, and they said, look, what you're doing is illegal. Go to the police station immediately and confess. So I went straight to the police station in the first town I came to, and I said, look, I'm sorry, but I've just arrived from the Solomon Islands. And they said, well, you shouldn't have done that. Never mind. And they stamped in my passport, reported to police station. And it's got a stamp at the police station, and it's signed by the commanding officer of this police station. And he said, when you get to somewhere there's an immigration office, sort this out. Well, it was a week later before I came to some. But isn't it great that in the world today you can still do that? You can still turn up in countries illegally and, you know, go to the police station and confess and get away with it. Terrorism? No.
Do you have a favorite place that you return to over and over, or do you have a special spot in the world?
I've gone probably, no, we're saying about Kathmandu, I go back to Nepal because the walking. You know, if you're going to go walking anywhere, well, the Himalayas is the place to walk. So I've done lots of walking trips, and the last one was about 2 or 3 years ago. I walked up to Mustang Lomantang, which is sort of a Tibetan region of Nepal. So I've been back to Burma, to Nepal probably more times than just about anywhere else. I love everywhere I go. You know, every place is interesting in some ways. And I've been to Bangladesh a couple times, and I really want to go there more because I've never done the riverboat trips in Bangladesh. That's one of the classic things to do in Bangladesh. I've never been to Chittagong. It's just great. The name itself is great. It's one of those places.
I've never been to Chittagong. I love that phrase.
Chittagong. We should all go to Chittagong. There's also that place in Bangladesh where they run old ships up onto the beach, and, you know, attack them with a hammer and a chisel and break them down. You know about this?
No.
Yeah, I've seen. There's been photographic books done on it. You know, if there's an old container ship or a 100,000-ton oil tanker past its use-by date, they wait till high tide and they start about 20 miles offshore, put their foot flat to the floor, and just go until it drives up on the beach. And then a team of 1,000 Bangladeshis attack the thing with hammers and chisels, and you just demolish it, and then, until nothing's left. It takes a couple of years, but they just demolish these complete ships. And I know people who've gone there specifically to see this, and it just sounds like, oh, I'd like to see that. So I've got to go back to Bangladesh. Yeah, bucket list. And the Bangladeshi tourist office, their official slogan is, "Visit Bangladesh before the crowds arrive." There are no signs of the crowds
That's wonderful.
Yes, hi Tony, I'm Terry Goldstein, and I own a travel company in South Sligo, especially travel company. Hi Don, hi Jeff. But anyway, I wanted to share with you that I attribute it to your maps that I'm standing here today. And even one experience that I had, and the reason that I did this was because in Lonely Planet it said, don't cross the Roma from the Feti side because there's only tons of groups that are, very annoying that you have to wait to cross over to Mukdana. And I ended up up to my waist in snow, but my Lonely Planet book survived. And the maps were phenomenal because I would go to the Kathmandu, I lived in Kathmandu for a number of years in Boda, and I would go into those secondhand stores, for the books and the maps. The maps were never right that the Nepalis put out, but the Lonely Planet always got me there, and I would take off for 3 to 4 months. It got me through Tibet, Ladakh, all through the Himalayas, but the Lonely Planet maps were always amazing. And so I just attribute it to you that I'm standing here today, because I used to be crazier than crazy, and just take off by myself.
We need crazy.
I have met so many people through the years who said Lonely Planet saved my life.
Yep, that's
It really did.
Yeah, you see, the ones who lives we didn't save, they're
They're not saying so much. Andrew.
Could you share your thoughts about sites like TripAdvisor and Yelp? And you use them.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things about travel advice today is there's no one thing that's right. There's room for all of it. And I look at TripAdvisor and other things. I don't always believe it, but I do look at it, but I still deeply like guidebooks, and I use lots of guidebooks still. So there's room for all of it. There's room for everything.
Yeah.
Yes, you said 1985 to 95 were sort of your golden years, with the Lonely Planet guides. What happened after 95? Was it competition or?
Oh, it was all of the above. There was competition, and we'd done all the low-hanging fruit, as the business expression, isn't it? You know, all those big books that are going to sell lots and lots of copies. We've done them all, so it was things that were, and the books were getting more complicated, and they just, you know, you had more writers working on things, and the costs went up, and it did sort of lose its buzz a little bit. But there was a 10-year period, and I know lots of people who worked for LP at that time. We said it was just the writers and the editors and publishers and so on. We said it was just a great period, that we did some really exciting books, and we just seemed to be lucky ourselves. I remember one of them was our first Turkey guide, that no one had been going to Turkey for years, and Tom Brosnahan, the writer who did the first Turkey guide, he convinced us to do a Turkey guide, even though nobody was going there. We'd do anything. And it just seemed like the minute it was on the shelf, suddenly Turkey turned round and everybody was going to Turkey. But our first Eastern Europe guide, which was David Stanley, and David Stanley convinced us to do Eastern Europe, even though, you know, nobody much was going there. And the book came out more or less the same time that the Berlin Wall came down, and everybody started going there. Of course, it was completely, you know, the expense was ridiculous, because the next edition, every single street name in Eastern Europe changed. There was not a map that didn't have to be redrawn from scratch, and all the. One of my favorite experiences was I was in the Frankfurt Book Fair just after the wall came down, and I'd never been to East Berlin when it was still East Berlin. And I was talking with some German publishing friends, and there are a lot of small publishers that started up in West Berlin because there were all sorts of tax breaks if you worked in West Berlin, and you didn't have to do military service. So any sort of, if you were a hippie, you definitely went to West Berlin. Anyway, all these German publisher friends I had who were from Berlin, they were saying about what it was like being there when, you know, the day the wall came down. And I said, I really must. I must come to Berlin sometime. And they said, no, you must come right now. Because they said the wall hasn't been down long, and you still feel the difference between one side and the other. And you go down one street and it's BMWs, and you go to the next street and it's Trabants. Right. And you can sort of see that difference. And I've been back to Berlin a lot since then, and I always really enjoy it. But we were sort of driving around the town one day, and we went by the old, the Soviet embassy, in what used to be the Soviet embassy, in the old East Berlin. And we went by, and there was this sort of wooden box in front of the embassy building. And my German friend said, guess what that is? And I said, what is it? I got no idea. He said, inside that wooden box is a statue of Lenin. And he said they don't know what to do with it. They're taking it down would sort of be disrespectful, but having it, you know, on show still, everybody hates it. So they decided the best thing is sort of to hide it. It's still there, but there's a wooden box there. And Berlin was full of those sort of things at that time. It was just crazy, really crazy.
I'm curious if you think there's an element of print guidebooks that digital will never be able to replicate.
There's lots of, you know, I use both these days. And I mean, one thing about your print guidebook is the batteries never go flat. You never need to worry about getting a connection. If you drop it in the river, you can get it out and dry it off, and it will still work. There's lots of things that print does. And you know, quite frankly, I find it very often faster to find things in a print book. And there's nothing worse than sort of searching for something, and you know, it certainly finds the exact word you want, but it finds it 150 times. Right. So there's still lots of things that print does a lot better. I like print.
You know, one thing I think about is when I go back to my old Lonely Planets and there's a wine smear on one's page, or little crumbs in another page, I'm immediately transported back to that moment. That doesn't happen with my
there's a YouTube clip of someone reading his New York Times on his iPad, and a fly settles on the table and he goes, whack!
Let's see, any other questions for Tony? Yep.
I'm curious, as someone who's traveled so extensively and returned home so many times, Do you have a very rooted sense of home? What is your notion of home?
Home is where Maureen is, but she's at home at the moment and I'm not. No, I like home, you know, but I've got two homes, which makes I like it even better. I've got one in Melbourne in Australia and one in London, England. And I've got, you know, friends in both places, and I love them both. But after 6 weeks, you gotta go somewhere. Getting itchy feet.
How often do you travel in a year?
I like to say that I spend, you know, with two homes, each year I spend 6 months in London and 6 months in Australia and 6 months everywhere else. So it uses up the year fairly evenly balanced.
Do you ever feel incredibly uncomfortable in a situation? I mean, I think you're such an amazingly accomplished traveler.
I'm not. I'm a very cautious and
You are?
chicken and scared sort of traveler.
You're a chicken and scared traveler?
Yeah, I'm foolish. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Yeah, you are worried sometimes. You know, and if you're not, you're. Although I got to say, all the scariest moments in travel have all been in taxis. Yeah, you can find them even in San Francisco. Yeah.
What is it that you still look for when you go to a place? What are you looking for? Is there anything in particular?
Yeah, there's always something new. Even places you go back to many times, you're always finding something you haven't seen before, some new experience. And I love the way it constantly. I was just thinking today. I was in the coffee bar here today, and I had a latte, and they did it with skim milk, and all absolutely perfectly. And I remember the last time not the last time, the time before I was in Italy, and I was on my way to the airport, and I had time before I got the train out to the airport. I thought I'll have a coffee, and I went into a little cafe bar, and just like I go up here, I went and said, I'll have a latte, please. And they looked at me like I was completely nuts. Well, you know what I was doing. I was asking for a glass of milk.
Yes.
And they came over and gave me a glass of milk.
That's what he asked for.
Who drinks milk if they're more than 5 years of age? Cafe latte. You can learn little lessons all the time, can't you? Yeah.
Is there a secret to your ongoing sense of joy in travel, do you think? Is there something you can pass along to us?
It's always fresh. There's always something new, and I think a lot of that is just looking for things you've missed before. And you can go back 1,000 times and you still find. And I went through Dubai on this recent trip I've done, and I've been to Dubai quite a few times, but I hadn't been for about 7 or 8 years. So an awful lot has changed in that 7 or 8 years. The world's tallest buildings. The world's only indoor ski run where the temperature outside is constantly over 100 degrees. Only in Dubai would they do that. But I went into the world's largest shopping mall when I was there, which has the Dubai Mall, Dubai, which has 1,200 shops in it. Including, part of our market is women who are sort of dressed in a black tent. But nevertheless, they need 14 different lingerie shops, including one of the biggest Victoria's Secret outlets in the world, and one of the biggest Agent Provocateur. It's the British naughty underwear company, outfit places in the world. And at the Agent Provocateur, when they're asked what their really hot selling item is, it's the jewel encrusted Swarovski riding. What are they using this for? Those naughty people. One of the great. I live in London. One of the crazy things that's happening in London now every year is about 50 United Arab Emiratis or Kuwaitis or Saudis each year fly their expensive cars to London for what's called the season. They fly them over there, and Then they race around London for 6 weeks. They have Ferraris, and then 6 weeks later they fly them all back to where they came from. And it's become a thing, you know, all these cars, these gold-plated Ferraris, and
The future of sustainable travel.
oh, that's ridiculous. I took a photograph once of a line of outside one of the big London hotels of a gold-plated Ferrari, a silver-plated Mercedes, and a bright pink Range Rover. And actually, you know, the crazy things happen in travel. I just flew from London yesterday, and I got on the plane out of London, and I discovered I was surrounded by used car dealers. And they said to me, you know, are you on your way to Monterey for buying and selling cars? And I said, well, actually, no, I'm not. I'm on my way to book passage. And they said, oh, we're all on our way to Monterey because there's a car going to be sold tonight. And it's being auctioned tonight, and it'll probably be the most expensive car ever sold in the world. And he said, and we're all putting $1,000 bets on what the price will be. And you know, whoever gets the price closest will get the $20,000. And I said, and what's your bet? This guy I was sitting next to, and he said, well, we're all pretty convinced. He said it's going to go for at least 30 million. He said once the price gets over, if it goes over 40 million, we think it'll just go through the skies. I'm betting 57.5 million.
How was the car?
Someone could steal it and drive it away.
For a used car?
Well, it is Italian and red. I expect to read in the paper tomorrow morning that there's been a good car sale.
Yes, sir.
How do you deal with jet lag?
Alcohol. There's no, look, if God intended us not to have jet lag, we'd all be in the same time zone.
One last question.
One last question.
Do you have a travel mantra, something words that you live by?
Do you know, I've got various superstitions, and I never sort of note things down until I've done them. I never sort of put down in my diary, flew on that plane until I got off on the other end.
So you, okay.
Various other travel superstitions. Yeah.
And do you have a sense of your, do you ever think about your legacy? Like how people will talk about you, think about you, what Lonely Planet was, what Tony was?
You know, I really, and I think that a lot of people have really enjoyed themselves. And I'm really pleased with that when someone comes back and says, oh, I had a great trip. I went to India in '81. It was terrific. I really like that. I really do enjoy that. If I had a legacy, that'd be it. The people in, you know, what I did, they got a kick out of it. So I got a kick out of it. So if they did as well, that's even better. Yeah. Shall we end there?
Yeah, on behalf of all of us, thank you for your